This board right here is easily one of the most absurd AM5 boards ever created. This is the brand new MSI MEG X870E Godlike. You guys have been asking us to check this one out for a little while. So by some miracle, we got our hands on one. But let's do our usual thing here with motherboards, ladies and gents. Let's take a little bit of a look at what makes this new board from MSI tick, other than the $1,100 US price. Let's take a look.
This video is brought to you by VIPSCDkey.com. Have you ever installed Windows 11 only to see the watermark of death? You don't need to fork out a couple of $100s for a key. You can grab one from today's video sponsor, from VIPSCDkey.com for a tenth of the price. You can use our code GEAR to get 30% off for this month only. How good is that? That takes that already cheap Windows 11 key and makes it even cheaper. It's easy as placing your order. Bingo bango. You've got your new key on your orders page. You chuck that key into the activation screen and you're good to go. No more watermark of death. Use code GEAR to get 30% off for this month only. Link in the description. On with the video. Back to you, Nick.
All right, here it is, ladies and gents, the MSI MEG X870E Godlike. Let's get the motherboard out of the box so we can take a bit of a closer look at everything that comes with this board, and it is really a show. They put the whole thing on show here. You lift the box open and it kind of tilts everything up towards you. But yeah, let's get the motherboard out of the way and take a bit of a look at the accessory box, and there is quite a bit to go through here. First of all, we've got some thermal probes. This is so you can basically measure temperatures inside of your case and you can set the fan speed accordingly. There's also a bunch of SATA or SATA cables for your 2.5-inch SSDs or your spinning Rust drives. There's probably too many SATA cables in this, if I'm being honest with you guys. There's also a breakout cable. This is for the front panel connectors for your lights and all your switches, so you don't have to plug it directly into the motherboard. So it's good that MSI is doing this now. There's also this connector that plugs the lighting controller into the motherboard. I'll show that controller in a moment. Basically, there's a million RGB cables for this controller, and this lighting controller will control all your fan speed, your PWM, and just everything that you're going to need for your system. There's also additional power. This is SATA power for that controller box as well. But I'll show you guys a little bit about this box because it is quite interesting. Basically, what MSI has done is they've removed almost all of the fan headers on the board and put it in this external box. This connects to the motherboard with the cable I showed previously, and essentially how this works is in MSI Center, you can control all of these headers individually. I suspect that this is through USB, but it's not actually USB, if that makes sense. There is a dedicated header on the motherboard for this box to make it a little bit easier, but yeah, I do suspect that this is just using USB 2.0 for full software control. There's also another labeled box for the Wi-Fi antenna. This is for the built-in Wi-Fi 7 that comes on this motherboard. Underneath all of that, we've got some more accessories. We've got a USB dongle for all the drivers and everything that you'll need to get yourself up and running. This does not have Windows on it at all. There's also some M.2 spares. So you've got a spare M.2 screw, a spare standoff, a spare thermal pad, and a little key to help remove the screws for the M.2 slots, and some documentation. Yeah, I mean, there's some labels and stickers here, but let's be honest, that's not even the most interesting thing. The most interesting thing is this. It's the M.2 expander card. This is a PCIe Gen 5 M.2 card. Yep, this comes with the Godlike. And essentially how this card works is this will allow you to put two hot swappable M.2 drives by unclipping these two sleds here, and then you can slide out the whole enclosure. This is also a heatsink that helps cool it. This is a very, very cool solution to this problem. I mean, it's not really a problem, but you know. Anyway, completely hot swappable. You can put your drives in these sleds and then you can slide them back in. It does require PCIe power. There's also a fan cable for this, so you can control the fan speed with your motherboard fan header. Just flipping the card over, you can see what the bare PCB looks like. I didn't think there was much point disassembling this because essentially it's got two M.2 slots that you'd find on your motherboard inside the card, and the drives go into the sleds and then you push those in, and it basically just plugs the M.2 drives in like it would directly on the motherboard. But Let's take a look at what they're doing for board headers here, because it is slightly different to what you're used to seeing. First of all, we've got the front panel audio header. We have the front panel connector for your lights and your switches to turn your system on. There's also two SATA or SATA ports for your 2.5-inch SSDs or your spinning RAS drives. There's some additional power for the PCIe slots. We've got two right-angled USB Type-A headers. Yes, I can see the bent pin here. I did fix that pin. That was my fault, not MSI's fault. I'm an idiot sometimes. But more interestingly, there is some more ports on the bottom edge of the board which are not shown. Well, it's not obvious anyway. There's a magnetic cover that hides all these. So you've got some extra SATA ports. You've got some switches for the RGB and some BIOS switching stuff. But all of the motherboard headers are essentially on this thing called the Easy Bridge. But going from left to right, we've got a pump header, two USB Type-C headers. One will do 20 gig USB Type-C with 60 watt PD charging, because that's what the extra PCIe power connector is. To send extra juice to that header, we've got a 24-pin power connector. We've got some more PWM fan headers. We've got a 3-pin 5-volt addressable RGB header. But up the top, we've got a front panel cable. We've got the connector for the bridge. We've got the tuning controller. We've got the connectors for those thermal probes and a USB 2.0 header, as well as an easy connector for that new MSI connector we've shown in other videos. Essentially, it's a breakout cable for PWM fans and 3-pin 5-volt addressable RGB. But here's another really interesting thing about this, right? This is connected magnetically with an edge connector, and basically you can pull the whole thing off and it gives you access to everything underneath it. So you can change the CMOS battery here. You can see there's also the connector for that to go on, and taking a look at everything, yeah, it is completely removable. The screen for the motherboard is built in, so the postcode and debug LED is on the screen on top of that cover. Typically in demo mode, this is what it shows, but it will show postcode readouts and stuff as well. Very, very cool. There's also two 8-pin EPS power connectors to send juice to your Ryzen 7000, 8000, or 9000 processor, and you will have noticed that they moved these to above the memory slots. Speaking of slots, there's 3 PCIe slots. There's a PCIe Gen 5x16 slot at the top. The next one down is a PCIe Gen 5x8 slot, and the one at the bottom is a PCIe Gen 4x4 slot with an open-ended connector. Like many new MSI boards, it does have a quick release system for the top PCIe slot, and this one is integrated into that cover that I showed previously. For the VRM layout on the GODLIKE, it's a duet rail system. It's a 24+2+1 phase VRM layout, and it has heat pipes connecting 2 massive heat sinks. So basically, the entire top of the motherboard is a heatsink, and then the I/O cover is a heatsink on its own. And there's, again, heat pipes that connect all of it for thermal transfer. The socket itself is an AM5 socket or LGA1718, and it supports Ryzen 7000 up to 9000 processors. And if you've never seen inside an AM5 socket, this is what it looks like. I typically do this for people who have never seen inside of a socket before, because it is common. If we flip the board over, you can see it's got a full cover backplate. It's not just for aesthetics here. Backplates like this are typically used to assist with thermal transfer throughout the whole board. As for RAM, this board will support up to 256 gigs of memory, up to 9,000 mega transfers in speed, and there's 4 slots in total. All the M.2 covers can be removed with a single finger. I didn't show it here because it's just so easy to remove now. There's 5 M.2 slots in total. There's 2 PCIe Gen 5x4 M.2 slots and 3 PCIe Gen 4x4 M.2 slots. You'll notice on MSI boards, they also label what each slot is capable of and where it is connected. So you'll see some of them will say chipset, some of them will say CPU, and this is handy just in case you're wanting to know exactly where the signal is going. There's also little quick release clips for the drives too. They're kind of like a joystick or a thumbstick on a controller, and it just makes it very, very easy to remove everything. For rear I/O, we've got 8 USB Type-A 10 gig ports. There's 2 USB 4.0, or let's call them Thunderbolt 4 ports with DisplayPort Alt. Basically, the way this works is with PCIe tunneling. There's 5 USB Type-C 10 gig ports. There's a BIOS flashback button, a clear CMOS button, a smart button. We've got 10 gigabit Ethernet, 5 gigabit Ethernet. We've got Wi-Fi 7 antenna connectors. We've got a line out jack, a line in jack, and optical/SPDIF output. Absolutely stacked rear IO here. All right, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed this look at this board. I'm pretty sure this is the first video on YouTube where someone's actually got this board, because this board is one of those boards that is a complete limited run. Now, even though it's like a retail SKU that MSI will create, when it comes to making these boards, because it's such a niche product, typically there's only a few thousand in the world, and I'm lucky enough to have one of these now. We'll be doing a build with this board, but what about the feature set of this board? It's pretty nuts, if I'm being honest. It's got all the standard stuff we're seeing with X870E, USB 4, which is Thunderbolt 4, let's be honest. But what's really special about this is this card here. I saw this at Computex, and I said to MSI, I'm like, guys, how come I've never seen a card like this before? Why are you hiding this from me? It's just a very easy way to have a hot swap M.2 drives, and essentially you're plugging it into that second PCIe slot on your board and you're getting hot swap storage. I love it. You know me, guys. When it comes to things that are super practical and stuff that I would use, I'm all about it. And that's definitely a card I'll be using in a build coming very, very soon with this board, because I think it is pretty darn interesting, if not a little bit overkill. One of the other things that's really interesting to me is the fact that they decided to make this magnetic connector for this cover here and have all the connectors right angled on this board. I kind of dig it. I like the fact that it kind of hides the cables in a way too. One thing I may or may not have mentioned is there are connectors on the bottom of the board, and there's a magnetic panel here that can be popped off. When I was checking this out earlier, the sticker was still on this part of the cover and it didn't look like it was removable individually. And I'm like, oh, why would they have made all of these ports not right angle and then a cover straight over the top? But yeah, it's just me being strange, but I've probably mentioned that in the video already. As for the design, it's a standard GODLIKE board. It's completely over the top, but also kind of understated at the same time. It packs all of these features in and tries to make it look as clean as possible. The little screen on the cover is pretty cool too. You can do all of the stuff with that. But the most important thing for me, and this is something that I've been really pushing for over the last few years, is 10 gigabit Ethernet on AMD boards. Yeah, this board is insane. It is seriously an insane motherboard. Now, the most insane thing about this board is if you were to get one, how much something like this would burn a hole in your wallet. Because if you're interested in the MSI MEG X870E GODLIKE, this board is going for around about $1,100 US, and as for Australian pricing, I would say north of at least 2,100 Australian dollars. The old GODLIKE boards, well, not even for AM5 or AM4 or whatever, they were like 2,200 Aussie dollars. So yeah, you can imagine how much this one's going to cost. I would say, rough estimate, 2,400 Aussie dollars. Right. So we have seen boards that are this expensive before, but if you're building a server, this is insane. I would love to say that I didn't like this board because of the price, but the features are pretty insane. And as much as I don't want to like this board, I kind of love that it's over the top and ridiculous. It is purely insane. And the truth is, You don't need a motherboard like this, but the fact that it exists is really cool.